Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
I got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go.
Amateur Traveler, episode 123. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks to Pauline Fromer about the art of budget travel. Think there's no way to stay in New York City for less than the average hotel price of $300 a night? Think again. We'll show you how you can stay in a mansion and spend a lot less.
I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Before we get into our interview, we have a couple news stories for you today. A new airline in Germany is going to give you an entirely different meaning for the phrase takeoff. This airline is for nudists. An East German travel agency is taking bookings for the country's first nudist air service. Passengers can strip off on board, but they will have to get dressed again before getting off the plane. It's really a shame because otherwise that security line could go a lot faster. And speaking of airport security, if you've had any questions about the new security procedures in the United States with the Transportation Security Administration, or the TSA, they do not really want to have a long, drawn-out conversation in the security line, and so they've created a new TSA official blog. And that blog they plan to use to get feedback and questions from the public and to answer them in a way that will not slow you down. Check out the link to both those articles in the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. I'd like to welcome to the show Pauline Fromer, who's come to talk to us about budget travel. Pauline, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Now, you come by this topic very naturally. You're the daughter of Arthur Fromer, who's been in the budget travel business now for over 50 years, I think, is when your father's first guidebook came out?
Yeah, his first guidebook came out in 1957. It was called, well, actually, that was his second guidebook. His first guidebook was for GIs, because he was during the Korean War, he was sent to Europe instead of Korea and found many cheap places to stay and to see, and he wrote up a guidebook for his fellow GIs called The GI's Guide to Europe. But the one that he's most famous for is Europe on $5 a day.
So did you grow up traveling to Europe on $5 a day with your father? Is that where the love of travel comes from here?
Yep, I started traveling with my parents when I was 4 months old. At that point, they would push me into a drawer for the night, and that's where I would sleep. And we always traveled on a budget. It was my father's philosophy, and mine too, that the less you spend, usually the more you enjoy. Because when you spend less, you're more likely to go to the places where locals go, to eat, to shop, to hang out, and you have a more authentic view of the destination, and you have more adventures.
Now, obviously, we know that this was your father's philosophy. When did it become yours? Do you remember a moment when you were traveling with your father or afterwards that it really hit home to you that, oh my gosh, my dad's right?
I don't know if there was such a moment. I mean, this philosophy is based in an ethical system that was taught to me as a child, that you don't waste money, that we work very hard for our money, that there are charities one can give money to and political causes, and that you don't spend your money worrying about things like 300-count threads in the sheets, that the real point of travel is about going out and seeing the world and expanding yourself as a person, and that if all you're worried about is where my next massage is coming from, you're wasting your time traveling. And I don't know if that ever hit me at one particular moment or another, but it's part of the ethical system that my father taught me, and he had rules of life. The first rule of life, you may want to cut this, was that the best Republican is not as good as the worst Democrat. So it all spawns from that, I guess.
And then as you were growing up, are there any travel experiences? I think of my two kids. One of them loves to travel, and one of them would just as soon stay home. What was the one trip you think for you that led you into this business?
Gosh, when we travel, it's not so much a vacation as from the time I was 4 months old, we were spending 3 or 4 months in Europe every year, updating the book. So it was more living than traveling in a certain way. It was very much a way of life for me. So I'm not sure if there was one vacation. I remember one vacation when I stopped being a picky eater when I was 16. I went to Copenhagen with my father, and he and a friend took me to this spectacular restaurant where I wanted plain pasta with butter, and the friend said, "Shame on you, you try something good." And so I had apricot chicken, and that was the moment that I thought, hey, this is excellent. I should be more adventurous in what I'm eating.
Interesting. You're just coming out now with another series of guidebooks, the Pauline Fromer Guides, and again, focusing on budget travel for adults, I believe is the way that you were describing it when I heard you speak.
Yeah, there are a lot of books out there for backpackers, folks who want to stay in hostels and don't mind eating ramen noodles to stretch their budgets. But there's not much out there, I think, for the average, ordinary American who is desperate to go out and see the world, but is shocked by the cost of travel, who may be a little bit squeamish about sharing a room with others or even sharing a bathroom. And so what these guides do is try and tell those folks how you can travel in an adult manner with dignity, but still save a heck of a lot of money. And the main way we do that, besides we give you every trick in the book for saving money on airfares, which of course is a huge cost in travel, but we also try and tell you about alternative accommodations, which I think is the best thing since sliced bread in terms of travel. Looking at Pauline Fromer's New York, according to American Express, the average cost of a hotel room in New York now, the average, is now $325 a night, which is outrageous. And it makes New York impossible for most travelers, at least American travelers. And one of the reasons it's so pricey is Europeans are flocking here because their currency is so strong, and New York is the cheapest gateway from Europe. But that's neither here nor there. So what you do, the truth is, New York is a very expensive city, even for the people who live here. And so what a lot of the people who live here have started doing is renting out their apartments to make a little extra money, or renting out a room in their apartments. And if you're a tourist, these apartments cost a third to half as much as you would spend for a regular hotel room. And I've seen some spectacular apartments in some of the most pricey areas of town. I visited a private B&B where a woman rents out 2 rooms, The 2 rooms are right on Central Park West,
Oh,
overlooking the park with one of the most glorious cityscapes out your window that you could imagine. But there's only one hotel on Central Park, so you're also getting a very unique view of the city because it's all apartment buildings, but there you're going to spend about $140 a night, and that includes breakfast. I also visited a little B&B that actually takes place in a Soho art gallery. So you live in a room off the gallery, you have your breakfast surrounded by sometimes wacky, sometimes beautiful works of art. When I was there, it was all these plexiglass nude sculptures all over the place, which was an interesting breakfast atmosphere. You know, it's a simple room with a futon bed, but the owners are lovely. One's from France, the other is French-Canadian. They have 2 delightful young children who you'll meet, although they actually live on a different floor. So you have the entire floor to yourself and the gallery space at night once the gallery closes. And for that, you pay, again, about $140, $150 a night, half of what you'd pay in a hotel for such an interesting experience.
Now, how do you find a place like this? Both how do I find it, and how did you stumble across something like this?
Well, one of the things that we do differently in the Pauline Fromer guides than other guidebooks do, every guidebook will tell you there are these agencies that you can go to and they'll rent you apartments and they'll rent you private B&Bs. Since we think this is such an important way to travel and such a good money-saving way to travel, we actually visit dozens of these apartments so that we can compare and contrast the different agencies that are representing them. We also undertake detailed interviews with these agencies. We talk to former customers of them. We really do the homework so that not only can we say that these types of places are out there, but we can give you some examples of what you might get and let you know that At Home in New York is slightly more together than City Sonnet. Those are 2 agencies in New York that represent the types of properties I've been mentioning.
Okay. Any particular reason when you say more together, just more organized, or?
Yeah, a little more organized, and there's safety in numbers, and Home in New York City has more properties that it represents than City Sonnet, so you have more of a choice. I mean, they're both fine, actually. They're both in the book. There's some other agencies that I didn't think were up to snuff, and so they aren't in the book. But those are 2 ways of doing it. If you really, really want to save money, you rent direct from the owner through such sites as vrbo.com, rentalo.com. There are a number out there. And we talk about that method of travel too, and we also talk about the risks. When you rent direct from the owner, if you don't like the apartment, you're stuck.
Right.
If you rent through an agency and something's wrong with the apartment, they can send somebody over to fix it, or they can move you. But if you ask the right questions, and we include in the book what questions you should ask, sometimes renting direct from the owner can be a great thing to do.
And you also talked a little when I heard you speak about home swapping, and there were some interesting points that you made that I would like for the listeners to hear in terms of the advantages of that. Obviously, somewhat, when we talk about riskier, I think of that as being a more risky option.
It's actually not that risky. A lot of people who haven't done it are very nervous that their homes are going to be robbed or damaged in some way. The truth is, the way you do a swap is you either do it informally through friends or friends of friends, or you join a swapping organization, which gives you a directory of literally hundreds of people all over the world who want to swap homes. And the options are remarkable. You could end up in a beautiful apartment on the left bank of Paris. I've seen castles in Turkey listed. I've seen houseboats in Sausalito. You really have all kinds of options when you do this type of thing. And by the time you actually do the swap, you have exchanged so many emails back and forth that you really know the person that you're swapping with. And the truth is that people not only swap apartments, they swap cars, so you don't have to deal with the cost of a rental car. If you have a family, people often swap with other families, so they don't have to carry cribs or high chairs with them or toys. And they also swap friends because everybody's worried that you're going to bust up their place.
Right.
And so they send over their friends to check up on you. And so it comes with an inbuilt social network. And it really can be a wonderful way to visit. I mean, the thing about apartment stays and private B&Bs and home swaps is they put you in real neighborhoods. They put you in communities. often when you pick hotels, you're staying in an area that's zoned for business.
Sure.
So it's going to be dead at night. There won't be local restaurants that you can try. The shops are only going to be where the business people go. You get less of a real picture of the destination.
So spend less, enjoy more is, again, the theme here we're going for.
And that's our tagline is spend less, see more.
See more. Oh, I wasn't even trying to guess your tagline here, but
that's okay.
But it sounded like a good tagline for you. Okay, great. And then you had some other interesting alternatives that I think people are probably not considering when they think about staying someplace expensive like New York City.
Oh, well, yeah. There's actually military hotels. There's I'm going to get this wrong, but the Airmen, Seamen's, Army, Navy, Marines, what have I missed?
Coast Guard.
Home, right in the center of Manhattan. If you got an honorable discharge from any of those service corps, even if you are from another allied nation and have served in the service at some point in your life, you can stay at this place. The rooms are barrack-like. They're not glamorous at all, but they're private and generally quite comfy. You have a locker for your clothing, but I guess if you've been in the Army, you're used to that. And you can stay at these places for about $80 a night. There are also religious retreat houses and religious hotels. There's a place called the Leo House on 23rd Street, which is run by the Catholic Church, and you can stay there for about $120, $130 a night for a private room with private bathroom. And there's a spectacular place on the Upper East Side called the House of the Redeemer. It was actually owned by the granddaughter of Cornelius Vanderbilt, and it's an honest-to-goodness mansion built at the turn of the last century. There's a famous library in it, which was shipped over in pieces from a palazzo in Umbria, Italy, a 14th century palazzo, and that's where you have your bagel in the morning. And you spend $110 a night to stay there. So all of these types of alternatives are in Pauline Frommer's New York, and I think they can make New York affordable again because it's such a great city. You want to go, but the hotel prices are scaring off a lot of Americans.
You talked about airfare obviously being expensive and getting more expensive every day, it seems like these days. Other than the obvious tips about when to go, which obviously makes a big difference in terms of airfares, what other things are you recommending for people to save money on airfare?
Well, it's important to search in the right way. When you go to such sites as Orbitz, Travelocity, and Expedia, you're not necessarily getting the best rates. Sometimes you are, but often the airlines that work with those companies pay a bit extra often to have their airfares float to the top. So you're not getting an impartial search. You're also paying a user fee to those agencies, something that I don't think a lot of people realize. There are much better search engines out there. They're called aggregators. And what they do is they don't sell travel. They simply aggregate the information, kind of like Google does. My new favorite is a search engine called Momondo.com, M-O-N-D-O.
Oh, that one I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, it comes from Scandinavia. It's only about a year old. It literally searches 500 different websites, from Expedia, Orbitz, and Travelocity to American Airlines, Delta, Ryanair, and EasyJet in Europe, which is a good thing to know because a lot of search engines don't miss them.
Right,
and it also gets Southwest Airlines, which is another site that most search engines miss.
Right, because they're not willing to pay to be in Expedia, for instance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but you'll find their deals on Momondo, and it's a very clean search. It's very deep. You get a lot of options, and they also have a really nifty calendar, which will pop up for your exact itinerary, which will tell you which day of the month it's cheaper to fly on that itinerary. So if you have a couple of days flexibility, you can really save a lot of money through that.
Yeah, I'm really finding the calendar feature, which a number of sites are starting to add. I mean, I think Travelocity was one of the first to have it, but now that the aggregators are starting to have that, can be a very useful thing. Because it's so easy to not know that if I just go on Tuesday instead of Monday, that I can save so much money,
And the great thing about Momondo and other sites like it, Kayak, Sidestep, is if you're traveling internationally, they're going to bring to your attention a lot of the small upstart carriers, such as Ryanair and EasyJet. And these upstarts literally sometimes charge €1 or £1 as promotions for the airline fees to those who book way, way, way in advance. So you might find if you're going to, say, Milan, that it's cheaper to fly from the U.S. to London and then hop a cheapo airline within Europe to get to Milan.
Interesting. What else do you wish that people knew before they went off on their trip?
I wish people did a little bit more research on the places they're going. I once talked to a guy who had been in France for a month and didn't know anything about cathedrals and was bored out of his wits. If you don't know about cathedrals, you're really going to be bored. In Europe, and there's a wonderful book by David Macaulay. It's actually a children's book that tells you how cathedrals were built and what went into them and about the different styles. And once you read that book, you're going to be dying to see cathedrals. The same if you're going to, say, Thailand. If you go to Thailand without knowing anything about Buddhism, you're not going to understand half of what you see. So the advanced reading that you do for travel, and it doesn't have to be weighty tomes. It can be historical novels. You read that book by Irving Stone about the life of Michelangelo, say, a sexy book about his life and sex life and all that stuff, but it really will enhance your visits to the Sistine Chapel and to the other great churches that he decorated.
And you'll feel sympathy for the people who had to paint the ceiling with him there, but...
Yes, I think during the speech you heard, I talked about a tour I took with a wonderful company called Through Eternity, and our guide was a scholar who was studying the letters that the people on the scaffolding with Michelangelo sent to the Pope and his people, because during the 10 years that Michelangelo lived in Rome, he never bathed. He thought that the waters in Rome were poisonous, and so everybody on that scaffolding with him were just dying to get off it because the stench was so overpowering. Another thing that people, I think, miss is everybody knows that when you go to Paris, you go to the Louvre and you go to the Eiffel Tower. But people don't think, okay, how am I going to meet locals in the place I'm going? And how am I going to really see what the culture is like? And so in the Pauline Fromer Guides, we've created special sections of activities and adventures you can have that will allow you to pull back the curtain on the local culture. They may range from simple things like cooking classes. I think that's a great way to go to a great chef in the area you're visiting and taking a cooking class with them. Usually at the end, you eat the food. There's your restaurant meal for the night, but you come back with a skill. And it's also a great way to meet locals because a lot of people take these classes. There are even more unusual activities that you can have. For example, in Pauline Fromer's Hawaii, we tell you how you can take just one day of your Hawaiian vacation and spend it, if you're in Kauai, helping with the whale count. You go and scientists train you how to count the whales and also how to note down what their behavior is during the months of December through March. It's a fascinating thing to do. If you're on Maui, scientists use volunteers, again, just for one day, to help count the eggs endangered sea turtles lay and to help guard those eggs. It's a wonderful way to meet these fascinating scientists, and also a lot of locals participate. Other things you can do, there are Café Philoses in Paris, where you go to a cafe and once a week they discuss a philosophical topic in English. And there you are, having the ultimate Parisian experience. You're in a cafe with a group of people discussing really important things at the top of your lungs.
What destinations, maybe 3 destinations, are people not going to that they would thoroughly enjoy if they went?
Let's see.
But they just never think about them. They don't have the marketing budget, for instance.
Well, there's an island in Hawaii called Molokai, and it's really undeveloped because it was the site of a leper colony for about 100 years. And it's as beautiful as any of the other Hawaiian islands, much less expensive because it's much less touristed, and it's a place where you can go to the beach and be on a beautiful white sand beach with only 5 other people rather than 105. So Molokai would be one. People overlook the national parks of Alaska, mostly because they're so hard to get to. But if you make the effort, you will be incredibly rewarded. These are pristine wildernesses where
so
you're going to
Denali
see
and such.
Well, Denali's the best-known one. I'm talking about the other parks of Alaska, and there are dozens of them. If you're into camping and you're into wildlife spotting, really, you should go this summer. It's a place where you literally can be alone in the great wilderness, as you can't be in other national parks on the mainland. And gosh, the third place people overlook. It's a rough one because people are going everywhere nowadays.
Yes.
I'd say Romania. If you're thinking of a European destination and you don't want to spend a fortune, Romania is very inexpensive. It has the incredible painted monasteries right on the border with Ukraine, which are UNESCO World Heritage Sites, and rival anything you'd see in Western Europe. And it may be one of the few places in Europe left where when you're going along backcountry roads, you'll actually see people still getting around with horse and carriage.
And where's your next trip?
I'll be in L.A.
It doesn't count, I'm sorry.
Doesn't count. Let's see. This summer, we're probably going to do a road trip out west. I have to update Pauline Frommer's Las Vegas, and so we're thinking of just tootling around New Mexico and Arizona, and then from there going to Nevada, just bopping around probably in an RV. Never done that type of travel before, so we're going to try it.
Well, I thank you so much for coming on the show. Any last comments for our listeners?
Get out there. Only 25% of Americans even have passports. And I think that that's a shame. And when you travel, it's more than just enjoyment. It's a life-enhancing experience. It expands who you are as a person. It brings new experiences and techniques of living into your life. So just go out there and do it. I hope that's not too Pollyanna-ish.
That's quite all right. You're speaking to the choir here, or preaching to the choir.
Okay.
Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
I just have one internet resource for you today, and you can find a link to that in the show notes at amateurtraveler.com, and that's an article on Travel Hacker called 40-Plus Safety Tips for Solo Travelers. I was reminded this week when talking to a friend about pickpockets in Europe, and that brought this topic to mind, and so I thought I'd share these good tips with you. Check out that link in the show notes. I got a letter from Bob this week who had a correction for last week's show. Our guest, Tom Merritt, mentioned that the word Gaudi traced back to Antonio Gaudi, or Antoni Gaudí, depending on which you're using, the Spanish or the Catalan pronunciation. And that turns out not to be true, according to the information that he sent. Let me read you his letter. I must take issue with the erroneous word origin of Gaudi. I leave my iPod, Reed pacemaker, in the car when I enter work, but I remember these two incidents that are 8+ years old. Bob Costas made the same error during the 1992 Olympic coverage. I recall the late night show and his corrections/apology the following evening. Bob also noted the foible as one of the biggest on-air blunders of the 20th century during a year/century wrapped up at the close of 1999. And then Bob sent us two links that I'll put in the show notes that back up his understanding of the story. The interesting thing is both Tom and I had heard this story, and Tom's understanding is that he actually got it from his guidebook. So thank you very much to Bob for correcting us. Brad also wrote about last week's show about Barcelona and said he enjoyed the episode. We were there a couple of years ago with the Reapers, and it was fun taking a trip down memory lane as we visited almost the same locations, but including the Olympic Stadium area. Although we didn't eat at the department store off La Rambla, we thought about it and did get groceries in the basement. And then he suggests a great out-of-the-way place to get your bearings in Barcelona, and a fun little side trip is Tibidabo, a small amusement park set on a hill above Barcelona. Compared to other thrill parks, the rides aren't anything special, but the views while on the rides are incredible. You can pretty much see from one end of Barcelona to the other on a clear day. Well worth the cable car trip up the mountain. And I'll include in the enhanced version a picture that Brad included of the amusement park. And with that, we'll bring this episode of The Amateur Traveler to a close. If you have any comments, feel free to leave them at the website, amateurtraveler.com, or send me an email at host@amateurtraveler. And as always, thanks so much for listening.